we've heard a lot about the Trust Act on the Senate side and some big name sponsors over there. But you're a sponsor on the House side of the Trust Act. Could you tell us a little bit about that legislation and what interested you enough in it to actually become not just someone who supports it, but a full-fledged sponsor of the Trust Act?
Right. Well, one of the big gaps we have is either a gap in revenues versus expenditures today, such as in the Highway Trust Fund, where we are no longer covering a lot of the programs that used to be covered with funding from the Highway Trust Fund. And then we have a number of other trust funds that are projected to run out of money in the next decade to 2 decades. And the sooner you address those gaps, the cheaper it becomes to fill that hole, because you're not waiting till the last minute, waiting till it's a crisis to fill those holes. And so this is, the Social Security Trust Fund, Medicare, a lot of programs like that are projected to run out of money. And we need to, what this bill does is create a commission to look at how do we rebalance things so that those trust funds are paying for the benefits that they provide, and that they provide those benefits for future generations. And so, we will see how that goes. I know it's building some bipartisan support, which is very important. And I think it should be part of the conversation around, how we adopt a fiscally responsible budget at the federal level.
Yeah, I'm attracted to that because those aren't hypotheticals. Those trust funds have dates that are going to be running dry coming up relatively soon, and they're very, very important programs. And I think what it kind of underscores is that even if we do pay for those new things, as we were talking about in the last segment, the budget is already on an unsustainable path. So you got to be able to do more actually than simply pay for new things.
Yeah, and we were running $1 trillion deficits before COVID. And so,
right, yeah.
As we go into these new ideas, we have to recognize this is on a base that was not, was not balanced, or we hadn't brought that gap together the way we needed to begin with.
Yeah, and let me connect that to the economy, or let you connect it to the economy, because I always think it's important to, that fiscal responsibility shouldn't just be an eat your peas thing. I mean, I've always thought that it's really about long-term economic growth. And, you mentioned some areas where you think we should invest more in growth. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, provided it's done for in a fiscally responsible way. So what are some areas you'd like to have us invest more in for economic growth?
Well, certainly infrastructure is very important. I can talk a little bit. We just are working on a package we're calling Future Fit the Suburbs. So my district is suburban Atlanta. And this is things like bus rapid transit, greenways, retrofitting malls, right? We have dead malls that are punched holes in our usually in the inner suburbs, in the fabric of our communities here. And we need to redevelop those. And we need to, and this is one of those times where I think I want the private sector to lead the way, but I think the federal government can kind of put its thumb on the scale to make those areas competitive up against the green fields. So right now, a lot of the new development is just happening out on the periphery of our communities, these green fields, but we want it to come back in and fill those holes where there's a lot of population. It's also better because it's a shorter commute to those places. There are many benefits of that. So that's another piece of it. We're interested in a national transportation infrastructure bank. Also looking at electric charging, innovations around that. There are a lot of interesting projects in this area, one of which is to remove regulations so that we can install solar panels in highway right-of-ways or even in the highways themselves in order to help charge electric vehicles. So I do think we need to, push strongly towards electrifying our fleets, and then push strongly towards renovating our power grids to make sure that they can support that electrification. We also need broadband. I think anybody who's ever been outside of the metro area trying to get access to the internet, even cell phone coverage is horrible. I know when I go out there, you got to stand on the hill in the right way and turn exactly correctly so that you can actually complete a phone call. This kind of investment is really going to be essential for development in rural areas. So that's going to be very important. We also need to invest in our human capital. And I think we all recognize that, higher education is the pathway to upward mobility in the 21st century. And I'm in a district where people highly value education and know that that is so critical. And so programs like Pell Grants, that used to cover 80% of the cost of higher education. Now it covers 30%. And we just have a lot of young people graduating with a ball and chain of debt around their ankle. I think there are appropriate ways to address this, where we really focus on where there is need. And the Pell Grant is a path to really making sure that we are supporting people for whom, college, the barrier to college is the cost of college. And so those are some of the investments that I would like to see going forward.
Do you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there's some interesting ideas like a vehicle mileage tax that are been proposed. When you talk about the broader agenda, that's going to be very expensive one way or the other, some ideas like a carbon tax or even a value added tax. Those are really big ideas. And like I said, I don't really mean to put you on the spot with a yes or no, but do you think that we need to consider some big ideas on the revenue reform side, as well as if we're going to go big on the spending side?
Yeah, so things I've been talking about with the chamber and with the business roundtable and groups like that are, of course, what is their perception of gas tax? How is that? And I do think we haven't increased the gas tax since 1993. And so there is some space there. And I think a lot of people are okay with putting that on the table. The carbon rebate, right? And so there's this idea that you put a tax on, it's essentially fossil fuels, but then you rebate it back to people because it has a regressive impact. You rebate a portion of that back to make sure you are blunting any kind of regressive piece of that. But there is obviously space between the revenues raised and the rebate amounts that you could then use to fund the green infrastructure that we really need to address climate change. There's a lot of talk about the vehicle miles traveled fee of some sort as a way of paying for our roads and bridges and transit as we move towards electric vehicles. And I think we should pilot that. It is technically difficult because you've got to, people got to have some kind of device in their car that records those vehicle miles traveled. And I certainly understand the privacy concerns about that, but we could certainly pilot it, and we could also try it on our commercial fleets. And I've started to broach that idea with, the UPSs of the world and some of the trucking companies and things like that. Would that be an appropriate place to really deploy that technology and see how it works?